Welcome to Uptime.com and to our in-depth walkthrough of RUM reporting. This video is broken down into sections: report aggregation, page load time, AJAX load time, errors, and bounce rate. You must first have an active RUM check within your account. If you haven't yet set up your RUM check, you can watch our RUM setup video or view our support documentation. To access your RUM report, navigate to Reports, Real User Monitoring, and click on the desired report. RUM reports on an incredible amount of data from page load time, AJAX load time, error rate, and bounce rate, and organizes it by categories like URL, device types, platforms, browsers, and country. The data displayed depends on the views you set via URL, date range, and aggregations. We'll start with exploring these navigation bars. Data aggregation. At the top of your RUM report are three drop-downs that affect the report view. In the All URL dropdown, begin typing the URL pattern or the URL itself, and Uptime.com will populate a list of similarly matching URLs. Select a URL or group to view all metrics specifically generated by that URL or URL group. In the Date Range dropdown, change the date range to suit your needs, as recent as the previous 30-minute session. Adjusting the date range affects the visibility of certain data points on the RUM report. A good example is bounce rate, where the default date range of the last 30 minutes typically displays as 0%. In the Data Aggregation dropdown, you can select an alternative aggregation for your report to examine. Our support documentation on RUM, linked in the video description, will provide an in-depth breakdown of aggregations. Also at the top of your RUM report is a summary bar that will update to reflect your selected ranges and aggregation. Each metric in the summary bar is compared to the previous week's baseline. Page views are the number of page views for any given page, excluding AJAX calls. Time to interactive, or TTI, refers to time elapsed before a page becomes fully interactive. AJAX load is the time taken to make and process AJAX calls. The error rate breakdown includes % of page views and AJAX calls with 400 errors, % of page views and AJAX calls with 500 errors, % of page views and AJAX calls with JS errors. Page load time. The first tab of the RUM report is Page Load Time, which includes sections on Page Load Time Trend, Page Load Distribution, Page Load Time Breakdown, and Page Load Time by segment. The first section is Page Load Time Trend, which measures page load compared against the number of page views for a URL or segment and a baseline of the previous week's worth of data. It reports on page views, first byte, first paid, time to interact, and displays the TTI baseline. Each aspect of the report can be toggled on or off to view data specifically. The second section is Page Load Distribution, which displays the distribution of users who are experiencing each level of the APDEX threshold. You can customize your APDEX threshold when first configuring your RUM check. The y-axis depicts the number of page views, while the x-axis depicts page load time distribution up to the maximum recorded value. The data can also be viewed in this donut chart. By hovering over each segment, you can isolate each APDEX level. Clicking on a segment again will remove it from the graph. As a note, APDEX is best examined in a larger data pool as it represents overall user satisfaction. The page load time breakdown graph shows the components of page load in their load sequence from initial connection through TTI, as well as the loading of all assets. The date range selected for the report is used and is compared to the baseline. As with other graphs in the report, different aspects can be clicked on and off to focus on certain metrics. Connection: this represents the time it takes to perform a DNS lookup, establish the connection, and send the web page request. Server: this represents the time it takes the server to process the request and initiate a response. Transfer: this value represents the time it takes for the browser to download the web page's HTML. Client, this value represents the elapsed time for browser rendering and JavaScript processing. Assets, this represents the time it takes for the browser to fully load the page with images, videos, and the execution of any JavaScript. This portion of the report can also be downloaded in SVG, PNG, and CSV formats. The final section of page load time is by segment, which organizes data by URL, devices, platform, browser type, and country. Data can be sorted by URL or URL group in ascending or descending order and displays. Page views, sessions, first byte, first paid, and time to interactive. To view the data for a single URL, simply click on the URL. You can also click to navigate to view the web page. To exit the single URL view, click the back button on your web browser. Device breakdown is by desktop, mobile device, tablet, or unknown, and the graphs can be manipulated to display certain data by clicking on the data point icons or on the segments in the donut graph. Platform breakdown segments operating system by Linux, Windows, Mac OS, Android, iOS, and unknown with the same visual control as most other RUM graphs. Browsers supported for RUM data include Chrome, Safari, Firefox, and Edge. User geography is color-coded by TTI according to the APDEX threshold configured for your check. Default settings for a PDEX follow industry standards and are: red represents frustrated users who are more likely to navigate away from your page after 16+ seconds of load time. Yellow represents users tolerating a page load time of between 4 to 16 seconds. Green represents satisfied users who experience loads between 0 and 4 seconds. In addition to the colored APDEX areas on the map, page views are visually indicated by level of opacity. The more transparent, the less views. Clicking on a country will further drill down into its states or regions. To navigate back to the main geographic menu, simply click Country. AJAX load time. AJAX calls are counted separately from page views because they can affect components after a load event is fired. It's also possible that static sites may have no AJAX load time. The AJAX load time trend graph displays data points for total number of AJAX calls, first byte, and AJAX load against the baseline of the past week's data and allows you to observe slow payloads. Spikes higher than about 1 second may indicate a performance issue. AJAX load time distribution measures the distribution of users who are experiencing a range of load times. Unlike page load distribution, AJAX load time distribution is not affected by your APDEX threshold. To read the graph, hover over a bar to see the number of users that experience a specific AJAX load time on average. The AJAX load time breakdown is a bar graph that helps visualize the performance of AJAX calls, using the server and transfer data points as the primary metric. Connection represents the time it takes to perform a DNS lookup, establish the connection, and send the web page request. Server represents the time it takes the server to process the request and initiate a response. Transfer represents the time it takes for the browser to download the AJAX response. The date range selected is compared to a baseline of the previous week's worth of data. AJAX load time by segment follows the same structure as page load by segment, but for AJAX calls specifically. Data can be organized by URL, devices, platforms, browsers, and countries. Errors. This graph visualizes errors color-coded by type and compares against the page views for the URL, group, or domain you are monitoring. Errors are broken down by 400 errors, which may signal your site has missing pages or is rejecting user requests. 500 errors, which, generally speaking, indicates an error at the server level and not that something is wrong with your page. 500 errors often indicate a growing issue, so the percent should be as close to 0 as possible. JavaScript errors are errors that occur when the browser is processing AJAX network requests, or bugs in JavaScript code that may cause processing to stop. Errors by segment follow the same organization as the by segment section on each of the other tabs we've viewed in RUM. View data organized by URL, devices, platforms, and browsers. And lastly, bounce rate. The bounce rate versus sessions graph shows bounce rate compared against the page views for the URL, group, or domain you are monitoring. RUM session activity timeout is 30 minutes, so by default, we show the past session of data. If your bounce rate appears as 0%, and if a session has only one click, then bounce cannot be determined. So viewing bounce rate with an extended date range is more useful. The bounce rate versus load time graph compares bounce rate to page load time and helps to correlate decreases in performance with increases in users bouncing from your website. The bounce rate versus load time graph color codes each error type for comparison against the bounce rate recorded for the URL or group you are monitoring and helps to compare error rate with bounce rate to analyze performance. The bounce rate versus errors graph color codes each error type for comparison against the bounce rate recorded for the URL or group you are monitoring. Data can be downloaded in SVG, PNG, and CSV format. Bounce rate by segment follows the same template as the by segment sections throughout the RUM report. Organize and view your data by URL, device, platform, browser, and country. Drill down to view individual page data by clicking on the session start URL. This concludes our visual overview of RUM reporting. For more information, check out our extended video library or follow the links in the description to our RUM support documentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us directly at support@uptime.com.